How's it going, everyone? So recently I've been seeing a whole lot of stupid advice being put on the internet, whether it be reading it, hearing it, it doesn't matter. It's stupid advice about changing your oil. So we're going to go over how to change your oil, not necessarily the process, but how often. In addition to that, we're going to talk about small engines, larger engines such as vehicles, and we're going to talk about oil filter purchasing, oil purchasing, and at the end I'm going to give you 3 tips for mainly vehicles, but they would fit for both small and large engines. So go ahead and sit down and let's get it chatting. So first thing we're going to talk about is small engines. Small engines are basically 1-2 cylinders, and they're found on like power equipment, bikes, stuff like that. Now obviously if you have a 2-cycle, this is not going to be part of that. You have a separate video that you need to watch. But so now we know what we're talking about. When do we change our oil? Let's just get deep into it right now. And first of all, if you are wanting to know about the vehicle version, go to this time and you'll be able to skip all this if you don't want to watch it. I recommend you do though. How often do you need to do it? It's pretty simple. 50 hours or 1 time a year. Now the 50 hours is going to be a lot easier to get to with larger equipment, riding mower, stuff like that, because you probably use it for large projects. However, even if you use, let's say you have a small little lawn and you only mow like 10 minutes twice a week, that's 20 minutes. Maybe your growing season is only 6 months long. You really don't have all that much time on there, and you're going to have much less than 50 hours. I would argue 50 hours is the maximum though, but if you did at 50, you probably will be fine. However, you probably want to do more closer to like 40 or once a year. So if you're that person who has a small lawn, driveway, pressure washer, whatever it is, once a year or maximum of 50 hours. There's a caveat. If at any point in time you notice that there's fuel going into your engine, the best way to know that is if it's flooding, or if you start to pull on it and it's super hard and you notice there's a lot of fuel in the cylinder, more likely not it's also in your engine and you need to change it no matter what. The reason of that because the oil is no longer doing its proper lubrication, it's losing its properties, and right now you're kind of damaging your engine, so you want to get that stuff out of there. I don't care if it was in there, you go to dry out and it doesn't smell like gas anymore, get rid of it, put new stuff in. So now that we know that 50 hours or once a year, I don't care how long you ran it, once a year, ideally towards the end of your growing season. If you have a year-long growing season, then what you would want to do is just choose 1 time throughout the middle of the year or whenever you want to do it. To be honest, it doesn't really matter, once a year. Or if you have a year-long growing season, you're probably pushing that 50 hours routinely, so go ahead and do that. But just find a time in the year and stick to that time and all the time. What type of oil do we get? Well, majority of it is going to be 10W30, which is this stuff right here. 10W30 is going to be pretty much for majority of all small engines. I mean, if you look outside right now, you see a mower and a pressure washer. They both use 10W30. Some of the larger ones could potentially use 10W40. You don't want to go over it. You don't want to go under it. The reason for that is if you go under, oil's too thin, and then you can start consuming it. It doesn't lubricate properly. A lot of different problems come up. Too heavy, then it's not doing its proper lubrication. There's a grandpa out there, I'm sure, saying that this stuff is like water, you should never use it, and I'm just full of it. Go right ahead and think that you're wrong. Do the normal 10W30 or 10W40, whatever yours is designed to use, because it was designed for that weight. You don't want to go above and beyond. The only situation that could ever be different in is for extreme weather. If it's very, very, very warm outside, you do need to go a little bit heavier. If it's very, very, very cold outside, you need to go a little bit lighter, because cold oil is thicker oil. And when it's lighter, it's going to be more viscous, and you're going to be able to use it a lot easier. Same thing with warm. If it's too warm, then you need something that's a little heavier so it doesn't water itself, not water, but thin itself out. So now that we know what we need, 10W30. Don't buy the cheapest stuff on the market. This is probably the cheapest stuff I could find that I'd be willing to use. It's a local brand. I know I'm not really any I don't really have anything to say bad about it, but you don't want to get the cheapest stuff. The cheapest stuff, you get what you pay for. It doesn't have nearly as great of anti-wear additives. It's probably just really cheap oil. Ideally, you would use synthetic oil. Unless you're breaking it in, then it is kind of a good idea to use conventional if you can, but it's not really needed. Just go ahead and follow the synthetic oil recommendation and you'll be fine. Medium grade, it doesn't have to be expensive, it doesn't have to be cheap. Medium grade, and that's it. In addition to that, sometimes you will have filters. If you have a filter, then go ahead and get the OEM filter or a good aftermarket filter. What you don't want to get is a cheap filters like you find on Amazon. Don't do that. Those filters are trash. For instance, I just changed the oil on an FJ180V. Here's the filter. It is a genuine Kawasaki filter. That filter is very high quality. It's definitely expensive, but it's very high quality. Another good name, which I would recommend, not getting paid for, but I would recommend, is Stens. If you were to compare a cheap filter from Amazon, Stens, and a Kawasaki one, the difference between the Stens and the Kawasaki is significantly less than a Kawasaki and a cheap one. So don't go cheap. If you need to do something a little cheaper, go ahead and get a good name brand like Stens. Or ideally, you just get the OEM one because you're really only buying an $8 filter maybe once a year. So, I mean, if you do over 50 hours a year, maybe twice a year. But if you're using it for 50 hours or more, you're probably doing it professionally. You're going to want to have a good filter because it's going to extend the life of your machine, which is why you don't use a cheap filter. So, good quality filter, 10W30 or 10W40. If you do need 10W40, it will recommend it on the engine, so just follow that. If you're able to, you can even look it up in manual, or if you don't have the manual, Google it. Google the manual and be able to see what it needs. More likely than not, it's going to be 10W30, unless you do live in those weird zones. Sometimes they'll say straight 30. That's not a horrible idea, but trying to find that is going to be significantly harder than just getting 10W30. Not many places sell straight 30. So if you are really confused and when you read the manual it said, 30 weight oil, just realize 10W30 is fine. It will not ruin anything. It's completely acceptable. You're not going to be lowering any life, so go right ahead and buy that. Don't worry about it. If you can use straight 30 and your manual recommends it, and you can find it, then go right ahead. I'm not going to say it's bad. It's a good oil. That's what it's recommended to run on, so you go ahead and use it. Engines, small engines, will require, not necessarily, this is a kind of a bonus tip for you, if you really want it to last, get something called ZDDP, or a zinc additive, whichever one, means depending on what they want to call it. But get something and put it with your oil. Reason for that is small engines have a wide range of oiling systems. Some are better than others. Some just splash. Majority of them just splash. So the oil, it just generally doesn't get, it's not pressurized. It's not going everywhere as much as it probably should, but it's doing its good enough job. What that's going to do is going to put a sacrificial layer of zinc on it, and it's going to prevent excessive wear by just wearing around that zinc. And when you change your oil more frequently, then you're kind of refreshing that zinc. It's a good idea to put it in there. All my machines, my personal machines, I put additive, super cheap. You can get a bottle of it. It's going to last years, just like your machine. So if you follow these rules, getting a good quality oil of normal, not super expensive, but not cheap. If you have an oil filter, getting a good oil filter and putting ZDP in there, your machine is going to last a very long time. You're probably going to have a different issue with it. It's going to make it garbage or useless or too expensive to repair. But your oiling system or your engine itself will never have a problem that is a result of bad oil. So go ahead and follow that. Personally, I never really have to worry about the 50 hours. How do you really calculate that out? Well, what you end up having to do is just figure out how long it takes for you to mow your lawn or pressure wash your driveway or whatever it is. I'm going to say mowing because that's the most common thing. If I take a half an hour, I just need to figure out how long I'm going to be mowing, and I go from there. Simple. You can buy counters. It's not really necessary. Unless you're getting really, really close to that point, you're not going to have to worry about it. Most people probably are lucky if they put 20 to 30 in a year, unless you have a very large land or a large amount of land, in which case you probably should have a bigger mower to begin with, and those usually will have counters on them. So follow the counter. If you do have a counter, make sure to write it down. Usually a John Deere, for instance, will give you a sticker. Make sure to write down that sticker and you should be fine. Next, we're going to talk about vehicles. I don't usually talk about vehicles because it's not really this channel's focus. However, it is something you need to oil, so let's talk about it. So if you are now just tuning in, all the information we're going to go over we've already went through, but if you've already seen it, some of this might be review, some of it might not. First things first, what oil do you get? A good decent quality one. Don't get the cheap one, but you also don't need to get the most expensive. Some people are AMSOIL fanatics, and it's a great oil. Don't get me wrong, it's great. I used it for a long time, and I have nothing bad to say about it. It is, however, very expensive. So unless you have a specific need for it, you probably don't need to have it. If you get a good quality oil, such as this Mobil 1, you're going to be fine. Now, if you really want to get into the specifics on it, look in your manual or Google if you don't have your owner's manual, and in there it will tell you what your oil you need to put in based on a couple, let me show you, based on these requirements of these for a variety of requirements. So if let's say, for instance, yours says it needs to pass, API SP. Well, as long as it says it exceeds that, you're fine. Now, almost every single owner manual I've ever seen won't actually mention anything like that. They'll give it very generic, but just know if you get a good quality oil, then you're going to be meeting those requirements that you need to follow to maintain good, healthy engine performance and longevity. But what you don't want to do is a couple things. One, go too thin or too heavy. I know some people don't like 0W20. I know some manufacturers even go down to 0W8. If your car is meant to have that weight of oil, use that weight of oil. Don't go and start thinking because you think it's too thin, it's not going to be a good oil, it's not going to lubricate properly. The reason why they do that is it was designed to run on it. They made this machine to run on 0W20, for instance. Something that can happen if you go too thick is a lot of times you kind of mess with a couple of the components. While yes, it may be lubricating better, your engine's meant to run on it. Let's say variable valve timing. That a lot of the time is oil controlled. You don't want to have too thick of an oil when going through stuff like that. It was meant for 0W20. It runs properly at 0W20. You put 0W20. Sometimes your manual says if you can't locate it, you can use this as a separate weight for emergencies only. But that's exactly what it should be, emergencies only. For instance, my vehicle says I can run 5W20. In emergencies, I don't put 5W20 because I always keep a healthy supply of 0W20 around. But let's say I didn't. I could put 5W20 in there, but as soon as I get home, guess what's happening? I'm taking that nonsense out, putting 0W20 in there because that's what it's meant to run on. So, weight is important. Quality oil is important. What else is important? A lot of the stuff on this container, I chose this one because it has a very egregious mistake on it. And that's where we're going to talk about with the frequency of changing. On here, it says that you can go up to 20,000 miles. Guaranteed. Well, that is just dandy. However, it's complete crap. Don't do that. Let me tell you exactly how many miles you're supposed to do it. Or time. 5,000, 6 months. I know. Your dealer or your internet search or whoever said 10,000 miles, and you think that this is a whole lot of nonsense. Well, let me explain. If you were to look at majority, let's say for instance, my vehicle says I can go 10,000 mile oil changes. The dealer I bought it from says I'm going to do 10,000 mile oil changes. They're giving me free oil changes for 10,000 miles at a time. However, if you were to read the manual, and I have, at least on mine and many others, that is for optimum driving only. What is that? That's not stop and go traffic. That's not excessive heat. It's not excessive cold. That's not towing. That's basically normal, good temperatures, a lot of freeway driving, and little or no stop and go. That, I don't know how often that happens. I mean, that never happens for me. I will never see 10,000 miles because I don't follow any of those. I do pretty much all of the others. I drive in heat, I drive in cold, I tow. That'll never happen. Now, if you have a little sedan and you're stuck in traffic all the time, but you're like, I never tow, never gets hot. Do you use your air conditioning? Do you put heavy stuff in the back of your car from time to time? Do you drive in the city and pretty much never on the freeway? All those things add up, and that's why 10,000 miles is a bad idea. Let me explain something else. While new cars are turboed, turbos use your engine oil. Do you really think that engine oil is now going to have to lubricate your engine, go through a turbo, which is hot, and be okay for 10,000 miles? And I get it. These are good oils. They have a lot of additives in there. They're very scientifically advanced. They probably were stress tested to the exceptionally large degree. I get it. However, that is not real life. And I don't care if someone online took a oil sample and sent it to a lab somewhere and they said it was normal. Don't care. Want to know what the only thing that means is that sample was sent to a place who took an average and said that you are more or less well within spec for what we see as an average. That's it. That's all that said. It doesn't say anything. 5,000 miles or 6 months. Now, if you're a person that maybe only drives 3 miles a day, back and forth to work, grocery store, whatever, probably never going to see that 5,000 miles. That's where the 6 months comes in. I'm not going to get too detailed in it, but a motor will always have a little bit of blow-by. Inside the blow-by, there's going to be contaminants. It's going to go in your oil. And when your engine's cold and not ran very hard, you're going to get more of it. It's just the way the engines work. So, what we have to do to combat that is 6 months. If you do a whole lot of 3-mile trips, yeah, maybe you only get 1,500 miles out of oil change. I get it. It sucks. However, so does buying a new engine. So, 5,000 miles, 6 months. Now let's talk about filters. There's, in my opinion, only one acceptable type of filter out there for a vehicle, and that's this. OEM. I have a commuter car, it's a Mazda. I go to Mazda and I buy a Mazda filter. Because Mazda either makes their own, I'm not really sure if they do, to be honest, don't really care. But even if they don't, someone made it for Mazda. Mazda felt it was good enough to put their name on it because it's built to their specification. And they're selling it as a Mazda filter. Ford, Motorcraft, stuff like that, buy those. Those are meant for your vehicle. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into the reason why, except for this. Let's say your oil filter somehow gets plugged up. Don't know why. Maybe it's a break-in period. Who knows? Maybe you just forgot that you changed your oil. Or you didn't change your oil and your filter starts to get a little plugged, sludgy, whatever the case may be. There is a mechanism inside there that will open up and allow dirty oil to not filter through there because the filter is now being clogged. Having dirty oil is better than no oil. Some of the aftermarket ones may or may not get that right. I'd rather have a pressure relief filter that was meant to open up and then I needed to, and filter the way that they designed it to be filtered. Some of the other ones, like I said, don't exactly do that. So with vehicles, there's a couple different types of filters. I'm not going to open it up because it's brand new, but let's just take this old one and we can get it. That's what you call a spin-on filter. Some of them have spin-on filters, some just have the filter medium and a couple O-rings and whatnot. All of them are fine. However, go to your dealer and get one. Don't get them online. Amazon is not a place to buy oil filters. Go to your dealer. Online, some locations are probably fine. Places that specialize in OEM parts. Rock Auto is one of them. Maybe, for instance, I can buy Toyota parts on the internet through Toyota at a not necessarily discount, but if I got lazy and just want to order some from their website or their parts website, I can, because it's still coming from them. I mean, don't buy online. I mean, sketchy places like unknown websites, Amazon, eBay, stuff like that. Don't do that. You're just running a risk that you don't need to do to save yourself a couple minutes from driving to some place or going to a completely different website and saving like $3. Don't do that. That $3 is going to cost you a lot in the future. So we've discussed small engine oil, larger engine oil. One thing I did kind of forget to mention about small engine oil, let's say you buy kits on, local store or whatever, and sometimes they'll, like a Honda for instance, will sell oil. That's a great oil. Honda made it. It's fine to use. I don't think I would have to say that, but I'll go ahead and say that. Same thing with larger engine oils. You can go to the dealer and just buy the oil that says Honda, Toyota, whatever it is, Ford. But just know that those are probably just going to be rebrandings of a lot of the stuff you could buy anywhere else, and it's going to be more expensive. Stuff like transmission fluid, maybe, but oil, no. It's completely fine to put stuff that you just buy at local stores. So now we talked about oil, filters, oil, quality of oil, thickness of oil, when to change it for both small and large engines. Now let's talk about 3 things that I think you should always do. Some of you already know this, it's probably just review. Some of you don't, but don't worry, I got your back on this one. I'll tell you the 3 things that not many people really talk about because they assume everyone knows it. First thing, drain plugs. Some vehicles most definitely do this. Some small engines don't. They don't even have a drain plug. But if yours does have a drain plug and it has a washer or some type of gasket, replace it every time. Every vehicle will have this. They'll have a crush washer. They'll have a little gasket. It doesn't matter whatever style they want to use. Replace it every single time. They're cheap. A lot of times if you're getting it from a dealer for a car, they'll throw it in there for free. Sometimes they make you pay for it depending on the dealer. Some are a little bit more stingy than others, but some aren't. So change it every time. If you're in a real pinch and you can't, I get it, but just know that's a bad practice. It's a good practice to always replace it and just continue on from there. Next, we talked about spin-on filters and the non-spin-on filters, the one that just has a filter medium, and you usually have like a little cup that comes with it. Both of which are acceptable, not a problem. Some are a little bit more aggravating, but what they do share is you have to keep it sealed somehow. On a spin-on filter, there's an O-ring or a little gasket on top. It's usually rubber, and sometimes they come lubed and sometimes they don't. If you were to put it on dry, it probably would be okay. However, it is a good idea to put a little used engine oil on it, or new, and it just makes a better connection. And when you put it on, if you have a spin-on, don't use tools. Don't use tools. Use your hand. This is your tool. Clean, dry, oil-free hand. Filter probably is oil-free unless you dripped a little bit on it. So the majority of it is. Hand. That's it. You don't want to over-tighten it. If you're going to be the one to have to loosen it next time, do you really hate yourself that much? This future you will thank you for not using tools. And in some cases, you can even cause damage or a very long process to remove it. hand tight is all you need to do. Now, if you do have a cartridge filter on both small and large engines, it's not 100% required, but it is definitely recommended to fill your filter if you can. Some filters are on the side, mowers for instance, if you can, tip it so that you can put the oil filter with it full and not have to tip it over on the side and it will drain. Or you could just put it on there as fast as you can and hopefully it doesn't all drain out. Not the best of ideas, but you can. Or you can fill it to the point where it's not falling or it's not going to drip. A little bit of oil is better than no oil. The theory behind that is when the engine starts for the first time, it doesn't have to fill it. It's just already full and it can instantly start traveling through the engine. That's just one less thing it has to fill, because in there you have lines and channels and everything. That's one less thing it has to fill. It's a good idea to do that. And my final tip is to always keep a log. Let me explain why. Your mower or your car, doesn't matter. You'd be amazed how often you forget when you changed it. I mean, yeah, sometimes you can go back and look at your credit card receipt or whatever, you can. However, if you wrote it down, you can just go to it. You write down a date, what you did, what oil you used, what filter you used, how much it cost. If you have a receipt, maybe staple it to the paper. That's it. Go to wherever, get a cheap little book, a cheap little notebook. Plain paper, doesn't have to be elaborate. Fit it in your glove box, fit in your shelf in your garage, your shed, whatever you want to do. Get a book. That way, when it comes down to actually replacing it, you can go back and look at it. In addition to that, it wouldn't be a horrible idea to get your phone out and set a reminder. I know, it sounds stupid, but hear me out. If you are that person that does this 6 months, that 6 months is a long time. However, it's a very short time. You may not remember how long it's been because time just flies. But if you can set a reminder, then you can go back to your book and you're like, oh, it was October, I need to change it. It's now March. Okay, I'll go ahead and do it. So I'm going to go ahead and change it. So reminder on your phone, in your book. And another good thing, at least for vehicles, if you have a book and you try to resell that vehicle, what type of mental insurance are you giving the person that's buying it? Probably paying it a little bit extra because of this. That you have a full maintenance history written down with receipts, and it doesn't look like it was written down all in one day. Some people can scam it, don't get me wrong, but that is just cheap insurance, cheap peace of mind to have, and it's not that hard. It doesn't take up a lot of space, and it's not expensive. It's a very good idea to do that. I'm going to go ahead and leave you at that. Follow me on Instagram at SmallEngine101. If you like what you see, keep watching, subscribe. If this helped you out, put a thumbs up, and that definitely helps me out. I'll catch you on the next one. You have a good night.